Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the George Collection. I'm Rachel Rightside Blonde. For today's episode, I wanted to talk about the diversity of articles in the original George magazines, which is somewhere on the left, somewhere on the right, and there were contributors kind of all across the board with the original Georges. We had people like Tony Blankley, who represented more of the conservative voice, and we had writers like Naomi Wolf, who represented more of the left-leaning voice. In 2021, Naomi Wolf posted information about the mRNA shot and the effect they were having on women's cycles. And as a result, she was deplatformed and lost most of her friends on the left. She said the only people who would really talk to her were Republicans, independents, and people of faith. I think a lot of people can relate when they wake up and they realize that nobody wants to hear your obscure viewpoints. And Naomi Wolf has not been shy about sharing her journey through this shift. So Naomi Wolf went from being a Democrat in the early days of George to an independent. She said that political parties are not going to solve this issue, and so she just wanted to remain as an independent. So here's some information about Naomi Wolf and a little bit of her story as to how she went from being a Democrat in the early days of George to currently where she's more for free speech and she's an independent. I hope you enjoy.
It's about my journey of the last 2.5 years. It's about how I got kicked out of my very comfortable perch as a 35-year media darling, on the left. June of 2021, when I posted on Twitter that women were suffering menstrual problems after receiving mRNA injections, I got deplatformed. It turns out that lawsuits from the Missouri and Louisiana Attorney General showed that it was the White House leading my deplatforming. But rather than silencing me and ending my life as an intellectual, I started talking to independents and conservatives, who were the only people who would talk to me. The new conversations led me to question so many things that I had believed were true. Everything from January 6th to the Second Amendment to abortion rights. Lastly, it does reveal the findings of my team of 3,250 researchers, medical and scientific researchers, that have found in the Pfizer documents a catastrophic war against humanity, the greatest crime ever committed. And all of that led me to conclude that we're in a biblical time in which there's really a battle between good and evil taking place on a spiritual plane. I didn't realize how biased it was, but overnight, when I reported on Twitter that women were reporting a menstrual dysregulation upon receiving mRNA injections, I was deplatformed, and my Wikipedia bio changed, and overnight, all the news outlets for which I'd been appearing for decades, all the newspapers for which I'd been a columnist or a writer for decades, I was suddenly a non-person to those very platforms, or, a crazy conspiracy theorist, and, just this global smear campaign. It was quite traumatic. Now, after 2 lawsuits by 2 states' attorneys general, we know that deplatforming and that targeting of that accurate and important tweet came from the White House. That depersoning from the left was actually a blessing in disguise, even though it was, quite painful at the time, because it did indeed force me to into new conversations. And to my surprise, the left and all of my old friends, my former tribe, didn't want to talk to me anymore, even no matter how much primary source documentation I provided that what I was finding was true. But the people who did want to talk to me, especially after this project unfolded, which I believe you referenced, in which at Steve Bannon's instigation, 3,250 doctors and scientists with impeccable credentials joined together as volunteers under the leadership of my COO, Amy Kelly, under my company Daily Clout, to go through the Pfizer documents released under court order. And they began to issue reports showing that a great crime against humanity had been committed, especially a crime against women and children and fertility. As that began to unfold and I began reporting on that, the people who wanted to talk to me were conservatives and libertarians and people of faith. So I began having conversations from which I'd been kind of insulated for my entire professional life because conservatives are really demonized on the left and silenced and censored. I didn't realize how fully, even before 2020 and 2021. And as a result of these conversations, I was forced to re-examine many of my core beliefs. And there's a chapter in my book, Facing the Beast, called Dear Conservatives, I Apologize. And another chapter on the Second Amendment. I had to face the fact that I believed a lot of things that were simply not true.
As I said earlier in the show, it really is a story that has been told by so many of us, where we wake up and we start looking at the truth and start doing our own research and seeing that things are not adding up. And then once you try to tell your friends and family about that, they don't want to hear it because it just is so foreign to them. So for anyone who's gone through that, including Dr. Naomi Wolf, I commend you and know that you're not alone. We're all in this together. And that does it for today's episode of the George Collection. I thank you so much for watching. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.
Magazine, George, which is a hoot of a magazine. I thought you were a lawyer.
I was.
What happened?
Well, we decided, actually taking a cue from folks like yourself and you around the 1992 election, that there was an opportunity here to change the definition of a political magazine. Certainly the way Americans were accessing information about politics and politicians was changing. Candidates were appearing on late night talk shows, on talk radio, on sitcoms, and there was a kind of a leveling process. And while the rest of media clearly had caught up with that, we felt that political magazines per se hadn't.
Your mother was a hell of an editor at Doubleday.
That's what I hear.
Would she have liked George?
I think she would have.